Hello my friends. In preparation for charging my biochar, what I'm going to do is preload a probiotic, which would be friendly bacteria, and what I'm going to use is some packaged sauerkraut. What I need to do is get the juice from this. And what I'm going to do, and I chose the plastic just so that I can use this to hold this kraut as I squeeze the juice out. Now you can use pickle juice with this. All that we need is the probiotic. I think you could also use the SCOBY from kombucha. And what we need to do is get this to ferment just like you would ferment wine or beer, or even making bread. This would be like the yeast and bacteria that would be in here. And we want the population of that to increase. So I'm going to take the juice from this, which will be containing all the good stuff in there, and we're going to kick it up. We're going to add some water. I got warm water here, and we're going to load it with molasses right here. So the molasses is sugars, and this will be what is feeding the yeast and bacteria. Now, for this volume, this is a tremendous amount of sugar, and I'm using the molasses because it's full of a lot of minerals also. But this volume is going to be mixed into our biochar, and as we're going to be charging it. So because of the smaller volume, I want to boost this up, and this should really put a large volume of the yeast and bacteria into this. In addition to this, what I'm going to do when I mix the biochar, I'm going to be mixing it with compost, and I'll be mixing some soil from an area that I know is or seems to be a very healthy spot where the plants are growing very well. And the reason for that is I want the addition of that yeast and bacteria, or the microbes, to also increase. But I'm kick-starting this batch with what I know is a good yeast and bacteria. And I can still eat the sauerkraut. So I'm going to leave this, I'll fill this up, I'm topping it up with warm water, and I'll leave this set for about a week, and that should go through a pretty good primary fermentation process here, just like with fermenting wine. And at that time, I'll go and add this into my biochar compost mix and create a really healthy soil or planting medium with that. And then that will be planted into my garden or even used for potted plants. Well, let's give this some time. I'll finish topping it up, and then we'll go from there. Here is the brew that I had mixed up about a week ago, and let me open it up. This has been fermenting, and you can see here. This is the molasses with the juice from sauerkraut, and what I didn't show was I put in a piece of SCOBY from my kombucha. And this fermentation here is an anaerobic, meaning it was fermented without oxygen, or at least I had a cover over it to restrict the amount of oxygen. Now, this is selected microbes that will be added to the biochar, and this is going to be added after the dry ingredients are mixed together, and it's still very rich in the sugars from the molasses, so that will help feed the other microbes that will be in the soil. And if you smell this, you can smell the molasses still in there, and you can also get a very strong smell of the sauerkraut. So this will be added, like I said, after the dry ingredients are mixed together. Once you make your biochar, you need to inoculate it or charge it, and that's what I'm going to do today. If you use your biochar and put it into your soil or garden without being charged, it'll have a tendency to cause your plants to show a nutrient depletion, at least for a year or two. And the reasoning for that, or why that happens, is the biochar being negatively charged will start drawing the nutrients from the soil and collecting it onto the surface, the adhesion effect, where it clings or sticks like a static charge to the surface of the biochar or the charcoal. So it would take possibly a year, if not more, for benefits to be shown from adding biochar that is not charged. So there's no basic rule as far as doing the charging of this, and but there's some basic fundamentals that you can follow. And here I have all the ingredients I'm ready to mix up. And what I ended up with when I made my biochar was about 30 gallons of pulverized charcoal, which is the biochar, and that equals about 4 cubic feet in volume. So what you want to do is mix about a 1-to-1 ratio, and it's also going to depend on the method at which you want to be using this. Now what I'm going to do is use this primarily for top dressing on my plants. So I'm mixing this up with a 1-to-1 ratio of the biochar with organic compost. So let's look at the ingredients, the dry ingredients that we're going to be mixing together. Right here, this is mature compost. It's manure compost. So this is loaded with organic material and loaded with nutrients. Then the next item is, of course, the biochar. And right here, this is the biochar. It's dry. It's somewhat damp because the way I made it, it was moist. So it's pulverized pretty fine. And this volume is roughly 4 cubic feet. Okay, then to the 4 cubic feet, you want to add about 1%, which is, with this, is not quite a half of a gallon for 1%. This is the rock flour or rock powder, and it's from volcanic ash. So this is loaded with the nutrients. And the nutrients, they're going to be positively ion, or the cations, positively charged. And the biochar, this is all negatively charged, or the anion. Okay, so then we need to have, and this is one of the most important parts in here, we need the microbes. So I went to one of the better places in my yard or garden and dug up rich humus, and it has an amazing smell. It's like being in the woods where you smell the mushrooms. So this is going to inoculate the microbes in there. And then the final ingredient is the liquid, which is going to be the molasses that I had did the anaerobic fermentation with the sauerkraut juice, and of course the SCOBY. So the molasses should be a 3% of the volume, approximately. There's no base, there's no set rules that you have to follow. Okay, from here we're going to start mixing the dry ingredients. Kind of like mixing up a big cake. Mix the dry ingredients first. Here's our humus, our earth. And now it's a matter of mixing it all together. Okay, this is my molasses mix that fermented for a week, and you can see how the SCOBY and sauerkraut started forming its own SCOBY on top. And I'll add water to this because this is good bacteria in the bottom. We want all that in there. Here you can see that's all that yeast and bacteria mixed up. How much water do we need? Enough to make it all wet, and I need the hose. Now it's very important when you're adding water that you don't use city water. You don't want any chlorinated water. That would be counterproductive. Chlorine would kill microbes. What I'm using here is well water. And water is like the catalyst for the nutrients. It dissolves nutrients and it allows it to migrate to the negatively charged sites, and it will stick to the surface of the biochar through the absorption effect. And charcoal is a good
retainer of moisture. A real good addition to this would be if you made compost tea and added compost tea. The compost tea would be full of the microorganisms or the microbes. And just mixing this up, it's not done. This now has to work for a minimum of 14 days. So in that 14-day time period, what you need to do is turn this probably twice a week. So probably about 4 times you'll turn this to make sure that it's mixed real thorough. And you do need to get oxygen into this for the microbes, because they, in the mycelium breathes just like we do. It takes in oxygen, gives off carbon dioxide. So stirring this adds oxygen into the mix. Okay, now we're going to let that set and stir it every couple, 2-3 days. I've been mixing this every 2 to 3 days, and the reason I'm doing this is to make sure that oxygen is getting into the mix. The bacteria and fungi both need oxygen for a healthy establishment inside the biochar. The bacteria, there's a rhizobacteria which forms around the roots, and this makes an exchange of nutrients like phosphorus in exchange for glucose or sugars from the plant. So the microorganisms are which is delivering the nutrients to the plant roots. Now this rhizobacteria forms around the root. It creates somewhat of a physical barrier around these fine roots, and what this does against it being attacked by different diseases, in addition to providing nutrients. Now the nutrients that's available to the plants is right where the roots are growing, and there needs to be a better method of delivering nutrients other than what's just in the immediate area of the plant, which it can survive with that, but it gets help. The fungi is a transport system for the nutrients. And what it does is it has these real fine fibers, or thread-like fibers, that called hyphia, and these are very thin. They're about 3,000, or I'm sorry, they're about 3 microns in thick or in diameter. And a tablespoon of healthy soil with this in there will have as much as a kilometer of length of those fibers. So because of that, these are extremely small. They can migrate or get into the soil particles, the real fine areas that the roots are too large to get, and this is where a lot of the nutrients are being held. And so this can get in there and pick up the nutrients. It will deliver it to the root system. Now, by having this, it can increase the area available to the roots by 7 times. So if you have a area that the root ball is extended into, say for example like this amount of area, it would be 7 times that area that would make the nutrients available out of that. So that's a pretty good symbiotic relationship there. The microbes and the fungi are delivering nutrients to the plant in exchange for glucose or sugars from the plant. The soil microbes, the way that they acquire the nutrients is they make an exchange of a cation with a hydrogen ion. So let me recap what we did here. We took the biochar and we mixed it with a compost, and we made about a 50-50 mixture. Okay, we stirred all the dry ingredients first, and then we added liquids. Now the biochar, to be charged, needs to have a lot of water, a lot of moisture in there. That moisture dissolves a lot of the minerals. We added the rock flour or rock powder, and this is loaded with the minerals. Okay, the water then dissolves these, and it makes like a catalyst that will allow that to migrate into the pores of the biochar. The minerals are going to be positively charged or cation, and the biochar is negative, so it will make an attachment, physical attachment onto the biochar. It's an adsorption method where it's sticking to the outside surface by the charges. And then the water would be absorption, meaning it's penetrated inside or into the biochar. In addition to that, we added good or beneficial bacteria from the fermentation juice or liquids, and I also added some of my SCOBY from my kombucha, and I fermented this with molasses, and it was an anaerobic, meaning lack of oxygen, for this fermentation. That fermented for about 2 weeks, and then that was poured onto the solution. Now, after that was mixed, it's important now that we add oxygen and do the inoculation of this with oxygen. We also added a healthy soil that was full of soil microbes and fungi, and that was mixed in there. Now that is going to be stirred. The oxygen is going to help with the molasses, is going to help it to multiply and get absorbed into the biochar. And so this will give a lot of sites where in the char where the microbes are going to reside and live into the biochar. The biochar is inorganic. It will stay in the soil for thousands of years. Being locked into the biochar with this ionic bond will keep the soil from leaching its nutrients every time it rains or it gets watered. So it makes the nutrients readily available for the plant. Now this mix is going on 2 weeks. A few more days, it'll be ready in time to be used in the garden. And there's a few different techniques or methods of using this, and I'll show you that in the next video. Well, once again, thanks for watching, my friends. Bye-bye.